Hi, and welcome to the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. I'm your host, Tegan Thompson. I'm a book lover, a chocoholic, and an INTJ living in a world filled with extroverts. I made this podcast to share my experiences and struggles as an introverted perfectionist, and to bring the inner workings of an introvert's mind to introverts and extroverts alike. So grab a cup of tea and get comfortable. It's time to unmute. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. This week we'll be talking about sleep patterns among introverts and kind of why introverts tend to struggle getting better quality of sleep compared to extroverts. So I just kind of want to start with a couple of statistics that research have shown that introverts actually tend to get worse quality of sleep. So the first statistic is that extroverts are 17.7% more satisfied with their energy while they're awake compared to introverts. So throughout the day, extroverts are often, I don't know if it's necessarily that they're more energized, but they feel more satisfied with the amount of energy that they have throughout the day, and that they feel like they can be more sustained with that energy throughout the day compared to introverts. And I know personally for me, I definitely feel that I can get a full 8 hours of sleep or even more sometimes, and I'll still wake up and I'll feel like I don't have the energy to move throughout the day as much as I feel like other people do. And the second statistic is that introverts are 14.8% less satisfied with feeling alert while they're awake compared to extroverts. Also something that I have experienced more recently is not feeling like I pay attention as well, or not being as alert. And I've noticed that more recently, and I guess I didn't think that was something that was part of being an introvert, but that is something that can be influenced by whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert. And then the last statistic I have is that extroverts are 6.5% more satisfied with their ability to sleep through the night compared to introverts. And I definitely relate to this one. I have struggled for the past few years with my sleeping patterns and being able to sleep through the night. I will wake up 2 or 3 times throughout the night, and I know for me I think it's kind of annoying. I just want to sleep. I don't want to wake up and then have to fall back asleep. So those are just some statistics showing that introverts do have trouble getting better quality of sleep, and that extroverts are more satisfied with their sleep patterns and stuff like that. So I just want to talk about a few reasons why, as introverts, you may not be as satisfied with your sleep, or not getting as good of quality of sleep as you'd like. And the biggest thing with being an introvert is that the quiet nighttime often invites those loud thoughts that we have a lot. Because, at night, it is often the most quiet part of the day, and therefore it usually is the time when introverts can hear their thoughts more clearly. And, just to kind of put it in perspective, for me, there's almost always hundreds of thoughts running through my mind, and I'm always thinking 100 miles per minute or whatever. My mind is always constantly going. But during the day, it can get too loud and kind of too overstimulating for me to be able to focus on them, or to really hear them and kind of understand what I'm thinking. And so, when the lights turn off and I'm able to just lay down and it's quiet, then my brain turns on, and it's oh, this is what I was thinking about. Oh, this is how I was feeling. And all of these thoughts start coming to the forefront, and I'm able to really like focus on them and kind of overthink about them a lot too. And so that's like one of the biggest things with being an introvert is that you kind of can get overstimulated during the day, so you're not able to fully process those thoughts. And then at night, when there's less stimulation and there's less noise, you're able to focus on those. And so that's kind of not something as an introvert that you have much control over. I will talk about some ways that you can kind of help your quality of sleep later on, but those are one of the things you don't have as much control over. But there are some things you can do to help with that. Another reason why introverts don't always get the best quality of sleep is because at night we often talk to ourselves. At night when introverts are alone, or maybe not necessarily alone, they're alone in their mind, and it's quiet and everything, they can have these honest conversations with themselves, and usually they're kind of like the best conversations I've had with myself. And I know that might seem a little weird to some people, like, oh, you talk to yourself at night? And yeah, I talk to myself at night. But, these inner conversations are really important to introverts to help keep them regulated, and kind of keep you sane a little bit, because you have all those thoughts, right? And sometimes it's really hard to understand why you're thinking that or something. And so when you have those conversations, you're able to really process, okay, I was thinking about this, and that happened, and that's probably why I brought up that thought. Or like, I was feeling this way and I really didn't know why I was feeling this way, but now looking back on it and being able to like talk it out with myself, I understand why I was feeling that way, right? So like for me, that is usually a time when I process a lot of my thoughts and my feelings that I didn't have the time for, or I didn't have the energy for earlier in the day. So that's something that can keep people up, because those conversations, depending on like what they're about and how much you have, they can take a long time. Like there have been times that I've just laid in bed for hours and I'm just like going through all the thoughts and feelings that I've had. And so that is another really big thing. And then the third thing is books and social media, right? Obviously, I'm not going to say all introverts, but I think a lot of introverts do enjoy reading, and being able to kind of exit this world and go into a new world and kind of leave their thoughts behind. And then also just, being in society today, there's access to our phones, and we can go on social media and just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, right? So many times introverts, and people in general, not just introverts, right, they fully intend to go to bed, right? You have this intention to go lay in bed and to close your eyes and fall asleep, but you end up reaching for a book or your phone, which keeps you up for hours and sometimes even all night. And you don't even realize it. You might just like be like, oh, I'll read like a couple chapters or something, and the next thing you know, it's 4 a.m. Or you're on your phone and you're just scrolling. You're like, oh, I'll just look at this for a little bit, and the next thing you know, it's been 2 hours, right? So sometimes those are things that can cause us to lose track of time, and because of that, we can lose time to sleep, and that makes it hard to get good quality sleep, especially with social media when you're on your phone. If you don't have like a blue light blocker that actually stimulates your mind to say, oh, I should stay awake, and so it actually makes it harder to fall asleep even after you put your phone down. So I think it's like they recommend that you don't be on electronics like 30 minutes or an hour before you go to bed. It's just so that your mind can like shut down a little bit, as it naturally does when it's dark out and it's nighttime and it knows, okay, it's almost like time to go to sleep. But when your phone's on, you reactivate it, and so your mind is like, oh, I'm gonna stay awake, I'm gonna stay awake. So when they're like, okay, you need that time to decompress and for your mind to be like go into sleep mode, right? So maybe setting down the electronics. I know that can be hard, but maybe try it out or whatever works for you, right? So those are just a few reasons why introverts don't always get the best quality of sleep compared to extroverts. And with that being said, I do want to talk about some of the ways that you can wind down before going to bed, just so that you don't have to be like, okay, well, I know why, and a lot of those things I can't really change. It's just how my mind works, right? And so, I don't want you to think there's nothing you can do. So I do want to talk about some of those things. And, the first thing I want to say is that it's so important, just like, maybe setting aside a time when you set down your electronics and you don't go back on them for the night. It's really important to set aside time to wind down and like to be able to allow your mind to relax. I think that could just be like 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be very long, maybe even 20 minutes, whatever really works for you. Just finding some time, and maybe the time is different for each person, right? So maybe 15 minutes works for another person, 30 minutes works for another person, and an hour works for another person. It really just depends on you, and I think you need to like maybe mess around with it a little bit and figure out what works for you and how much time you need to wind down. But one of the things you can do to wind down is to meditate. And you can do that however you choose to. I think there's so many different ways to meditate. If that's kind of like focusing on your physical body and like its relation to kind of like your surroundings and like your physical surroundings and stuff like that. If it's you just kind of like sitting with your thoughts and kind of processing those things. If you're religious and that's you praying, however it may be, whatever type of meditation you want to go through, that is totally up for you to decide. But I think setting aside time before you go to sleep to kind of meditate and just relax a bit will give your mind time to quiet down so that you're not having all of those thoughts when you're laying in bed trying to go to sleep, right? Another thing you can do is to journal, right? This allows you to be able to write all your thoughts and your feelings down and kind of go through the similar things that you would do in your mind about processing those things and kind of maybe talking about it a little bit, but you're writing it down so that you don't have to think about them as much when you're trying to sleep, right? Another thing you can do is read a book, and I say this assuming you have the self-control to put the book down when it's time to go to sleep, right? I know not everyone has that self-control, or maybe it's something you need to work on, but being able to read a book kind of allows you to engage your mind in a different way than like social media would, and doesn't provide the blue light, and it just can really help, again, quiet your mind, because as I mentioned earlier, at least for me, and I know some other people who, when they really like to read, like reading allows you to leave your thoughts behind and kind of just like focus on the things that are happening in the book and kind of escape to a new world, right? So again, you kind of have to have the self-control to be able to set the book down. If you know that if you pick the book up and you're going to be reading for a few hours and it's going to not help you go to sleep, then maybe that choice isn't how you wind down. Maybe that's something you can find time for outside of that. And then the last thing I have on my list is to write a to-do list for the next day. This is something that my therapist actually talked to me about when she was asking me, like, oh, what do you think about when you're trying to go to sleep. Like when you're trying to go to sleep and you're not being able to fall asleep, what are you thinking about? Well, obviously my first answer was kind of like, well, everything. Like I'm thinking about like literally everything that you could probably think about, to be honest. But I found one of the big things that I was thinking about was like the things I needed to do in the next day or the next few days or something, like the things that I needed to get done and how much time I had to do them and stuff like that. And so it was recommended to me that like maybe you should just write a to-do list for your next day so that you can kind of clear your mind of the things that you need to do, put them on a piece of paper, have that physical copy, know that you're not going to forget them because they're there and they're there for you the next morning. And that you don't have to like try and think about them so much at night because, you've already made a plan or you've already written them down and they're already there for the next day. And I found that has really helped me, and I would recommend it to people if like that's something you think about. If you think about all the things that you need to do in the future, like write them down, have that list, create a plan, because it really helped me to stop thinking about it so much at night and like worrying about, oh, will I get it done and stuff like that, because I had already had a plan to get it done. So yeah. Those are just some of the ways that you can wind down before bed. Again, find what works for you. There are definitely a lot of other ways that you can wind down before bed. I think these are like the 4 things that I find that help me really wind down and would recommend to other people. But obviously there's so many different ways, and I just really encourage you, like everybody is different. I really encourage you to just kind of figure out what works for you and what's best for you. Because that's what's most important, is what works for you. What works for someone else is not always going to work for you, and it's okay. Like that doesn't make you weird or anything. That just makes you different, and we're all different, so that is definitely okay. And find what works for you, okay? So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or if you learned anything new, please go share it with a friend. And as always, have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next week on the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast.